Tiffany Ariana Trump was born on October 13, 1993, in West Palm Beach, Florida, 2 months before her parents got married. Her father was Donald Trump, who had spent the previous few years finalizing an ugly, headline-devouring divorce from his first wife. Ivana, after his relationship with a young actress named Marla Maples, became one of the most covered tabloid stories of 1990. Her mother was that actress, Marla Maples, a former beauty pageant contestant from Cohutta, Georgia, who had been involved with Donald Trump since the late 1980s and became pregnant with Tiffany in 1993. The baby was named for Tiffany & Company, the jewelry store on Fifth Avenue next to Trump Tower. Trump had purchased the air rights above that store in the 1980s while building the tower beside it, and the naming was reportedly his idea. Donald and Marla married that December at the Plaza Hotel in New York, in front of roughly 1,000 guests. It was, by any measure, a strange way to begin a childhood, an infant born into the tail end of one of the loudest scandals in New York tabloid history, given the name of a luxury retailer as a kind of inside joke. The marriage didn't last. Donald and Marla separated in 1997 and divorced in 1999, and when Marla relocated to Calabasas, California, she took Tiffany with her and raised her there largely on her own. Marla has said this plainly and repeatedly, and Tiffany has confirmed it in her own words. Her father was a good provider, she said, generous with education and material things, but when it came to actual time, it was mostly just her mother. Marla told People magazine that Trump wasn't built for the daily mechanics of parenting, the small stuff, even as she insisted he loved his children without question. Everything, she said, was a negotiation. That negotiation was never really about money. Donald Trump provided for Tiffany's education and material needs without apparent gaps. What was actually being negotiated was time, attention, and the specific unglamorous form of presence that no amount of tuition can substitute for. A child in Calabasas with a father in Trump Tower can receive financial security across 3,000 miles without any difficulty. What she can't receive that way is a father who shows up to the school play, who knows which teacher is being difficult, who's simply there on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when something has gone wrong and she needs to talk to someone. Marla's negotiation, as she's described it, was about bridging that gap as best she could without pretending it wasn't there. Tiffany still saw her father several times a year. She visited New York, and she spent some summers at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, which in those years functioned as both the family's vacation property and an active private club with a steady churn of members and guests. She attended the roughly $30,000 a year Viewpoint School in Calabasas, where her classmates included children from the Kardashian family, and where her mother's friendship with Kris Jenner gave Tiffany a front-row seat to the particular strain of Los Angeles wealth that defined that community in the early 2000s. She grew up privileged and largely outside the media spotlight, and that second part was deliberate. Marla Maples has said she moved to California specifically to give her daughter something like a normal childhood, away from the pressure of the Trump name and away from a New York media apparatus that had documented her parents' affair and divorce with what amounted to civic project thoroughness. She said she wanted Tiffany to have the chance to find her own identity instead of living permanently in someone else's shadow. That deliberately normal childhood produced a fairly serious young woman. Tiffany enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania, her father's alma mater, in the fall of 2012 and graduated in 2016 with a double major in sociology, with a concentration in law and urban studies, a course of study that pointed toward genuine intellectual curiosity about how social systems function rather than the business school track. Her older half-siblings had mostly followed. Her senior thesis, written under a sociology professor named Hossein Fetni, examined incarceration in the United States against the framework of the International Bill of Human Rights, and concluded that American law failed to adequately protect the rights of the people caught inside its prison system. It's a striking piece of work to have come from a Trump, both for its subject matter and for how far it sits from the political rhetoric her father would later build a career on. From Penn, she went to Georgetown Law School, graduating in the spring of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. Her commencement held virtually rather than on a stage. She passed the bar exam in New York the following year. Unlike any of her Trump half-siblings, she became a licensed attorney, holding a credential that had nothing to do with the family business. Those half-siblings had taken very different paths. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump became executive vice presidents at the Trump Organization while still in their 20s, careers that were, by design, inseparable from the family's commercial identity. Ivanka Trump had worked inside the business, launched her own fashion and jewelry lines using the family's name and resources, and then became a senior advisor in her father's White House with an actual West Wing office and a formal policy portfolio. These were all real accomplishments. They were also all built inside the Trump family's own institutional infrastructure, using the family's money, the family's name, and the family's access. Barron, the youngest, was still in school during these years. Tiffany alone built a professional credential entirely through institutions that accepted or rejected her on her own academic record, in a field that operated on rules the Trump organization had no hand in writing. The University of Pennsylvania didn't admit her because of who her father was, or at least not in the same direct way a company he owned might have. Georgetown Law didn't rank her, or grade her exams, based on the family name. Her bar admission required exactly the same standard everyone else's did. Inside this particular family, that law degree functioned as an act of independence, arguably the only one clearly visible in the public record of her life before her marriage, and it went almost entirely unmarked within the family's own public messaging. It received a single tweet from her father on the day of her graduation. "Great student, great school," he wrote, adding that a lawyer in the family was exactly what he needed and that he was proud of her. The sentiment was warm enough. It also arrived hours after the actual event, gave no real sense of when the degree had been earned, and sat in his feed sandwiched between whatever else he happened to be posting that day. Marla, for her part, told CNN how hard her daughter had worked and how proud she was, adding that she, as Tiffany's mother, had always known what her daughter was capable of. For most of the years surrounding her father's political rise, Tiffany also occupied a specific and fairly uncomfortable position. She was the Trump child the media consistently forgot to mention. When Fox News aired a one-hour special in 2016 called Meet the Trumps, built around one-on-one interviews with Melania, Ivanka, and both of the adult sons, the special's only reference to Tiffany was a brief note that she also existed and kept a low profile. Gossip columns took to calling her the Jan Brady of the family. The New York Times ran a profile of her in October 2016 under the headline "The Other Trump." During that campaign, she was regularly photographed at the edges of events, present but peripheral, rarely handed the interview time or the stage moment her siblings received as a matter of course. She was also left out of a biographical documentary about her father that screened at the Republican National Convention, absent entirely from the film's account of the family being offered to the country as a reason to trust its patriarch. Then, in the summer of 2019, came the Madeleine Westerhout episode. Westerhout, who had served as Trump's personal secretary and then as director of Oval Office operations, essentially the gatekeeper to the president himself, attended an off-the-record dinner with reporters near Bedminster, New Jersey, and, after a few drinks, said things about the Trump family that predictably didn't stay off the record. Among the details that leaked out was that the president reportedly didn't love being photographed next to Tiffany because of how she looked. Westerhout was pushed out within days. When reporters asked Trump about it, he called her a good person, insisted the story about Tiffany was false, and moved on. He did not publicly and specifically dispute what she was reported to have actually said. Not long after, Tiffany posted a short passage from a Rumi poem to her Instagram page about the impossibility of ever truly being known by people who only study your surface. Business Insider and several other outlets read it as a quiet response to the Westerhout story. Tiffany never confirmed or denied that reading. The post simply sat there, self-contained, which is precisely the kind of careful, deniable precision a law school graduate tends to reach for when she wants to say something without ever being quoted saying it directly. Her father hadn't exactly needed Westerhout's help to make the same point himself. On election night, November 8, 2016, calling into Fox and Friends to talk about his children, Trump ran through them warmly, proud of Don, proud of Eric, proud of Ivanka. Then he got to Tiffany and said he was proud of her too, to a lesser extent, since she'd only recently finished school. He said this live on the day the country was deciding whether to make him president, and he ranked his own daughter's place in his affections with an explicit qualifier. By then, she had campaigned for him. She had spoken at the Republican National Convention. She had made a real, earnest effort to be present in exactly the way the family seemed to require of its members. The phrase reached her anyway, the way that kind of thing tends to reach everyone eventually. She heard an echo of it again once her father won and the transition team was announced. Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka, and Eric all received formal roles. Tiffany did not. A source told People magazine in 2018 that since the inauguration, Tiffany and her father had sometimes gone months without speaking, and that there had been long stretches where she simply didn't see him at all. It was during one of the quieter stretches of that period that she met Michael Boulos in the summer of 2018 on the Greek island of Mykonos at a beach club owned by the actress Lindsay Lohan, which for one brief and genuinely strange window in celebrity culture was an actual place where things happened. Both Tiffany and Michael were there with their own friend groups. She was 24. He was 21. They started spending time together, and the relationship became public that September when they were photographed together at a fashion show during New York Fashion Week. Tiffany brought him to Thanksgiving at Mar-a-Lago that November. She brought him to Christmas at the White House in December. The following December, she brought Michael and his parents to the White House as well, where they were photographed with the president and the First Lady. That steady progression of holiday invitations and White House visits functions inside the Trump family's particular social machinery as something closer to an institutional audit than a romantic courtship. The real question being answered through each successive appearance wasn't whether Tiffany loved Michael. It was whether Michael's family could operate comfortably inside the Trump ecosystem, and whether the family's patriarch was willing to extend the specific, visible form of approval the family runs on, access. Michael and his father got that access. The relationship was, in the family's own terms, approved. Who Michael Boulos is on his own terms matters more to this story than it usually gets credit for. He was born in Lebanon and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, where the Boulos family has run one of West Africa's larger business conglomerates for decades. That company, SCOA Nigeria, originally rooted in a French colonial-era trading firm and rebuilt under the Boulos family's stewardship, grew into a billion-dollar operation spanning vehicle and equipment assembly, retail, and construction across multiple West African countries. Michael's father, Masad Boulos, was born in 1971 in the northern Lebanese village of Kafaraka, moved to Texas as a teenager, studied business and law in Houston, became an American citizen, and built his career by expanding the family's Nigerian operations while marrying into another prominent Lebanese business family. Michael's mother, Sarah Fadul, is the daughter of Lebanese businessman Zuhair Fadul. Michael himself grew up in Lagos, attended the British International School there, in a metropolitan area of well over 10 million people, and later earned a master's degree from City University of London in project management, finance, and risk. In the specific terms that matter inside a family as attentive to wealth and its display as the Trumps, he came from money that predated and didn't depend on the Trump name at all. Money grounded in an actual operating business rather than in licensing arrangements or brand relationships. The Trumps, in the blunter reading of that distinction, sell a name. The Boulos family runs an actual company inside a household that has spent decades obsessing over exactly that difference. It was not a trivial one. The Trump family seemed to register the difference quickly. Masad Boulos began showing up at Trump-adjacent events not long after that first White House Christmas visit, building relationships with Trump's political circle and positioning himself as a Republican-friendly voice inside Arab American communities he already knew well through decades of business across Lebanon, Nigeria, and the Lebanese diaspora in Texas and Michigan. By 2024, Masad had become a central figure in the Trump campaign's outreach to Arab American voters, a critical constituency in Michigan, a swing state with one of the country's largest Arab American populations, concentrated around Dearborn. The Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza had alienated many voters in that community who had previously leaned Democratic, and Masad Boulos had the relationships, the cultural fluency, and the personal credibility to help translate that alienation into votes for Trump. After the 2024 election, Trump named him Senior Advisor for Arab and Middle Eastern Affairs, making him the highest-ranking Lebanese-American official in a White House since Philip Habib served as Ronald Reagan's Middle East envoy during the Lebanese Civil War. Here, in plain terms, is the transaction the marriage ultimately completed. Tiffany brought the Boulos family the Trump name, access to the most powerful political brand on the planet, and direct proximity to the American presidency. Masad Boulos brought the Trump operation his relationships across the Arab world, his standing inside Lebanese, Nigerian, and Arab American political circles built over 6 decades, and a demonstrated willingness to align his own regional instincts, including a documented friendship with the Hezbollah-backed Lebanese presidential candidate Suleiman Frangia, with whatever the Trump administration's broader agenda required. The relationship between Tiffany and Michael began, by every available account, as a genuine romance between two young people who happened to meet on a Greek island. By the time of their wedding, it had become something structurally larger, a merger between two families whose interests turned out to align with a precision that a beach club in Mykonos never could have predicted. That wedding took place on November 12, 2022, at Mar-a-Lago 3 days before Donald Trump's planned announcement of his 2024 presidential campaign, which he delivered on November 15th. The proximity is often left out of the coverage, but it's hard to read as coincidental. A warm, photogenic family event at the candidate's own club, covered extensively by a press corps that was already gathering in Palm Beach for what everyone in political media understood was coming, functioned almost perfectly as a soft launch ahead of the more combative coverage the formal announcement would generate days later. Hurricane Nicole had made landfall in Florida the week before, and there had been real concern the outdoor ceremony wouldn't survive the weather. It did. Whether the wedding date was deliberately timed around the campaign announcement isn't something the public record settles either way. What is documented is that Trump rehearsed walking Tiffany down the aisle the day before the ceremony in a blue open-collar suit, with cameras present for the rehearsal too. For the ceremony itself, Tiffany wore a long-sleeved, crystal-encrusted Elie Saab gown. Roughly 250 guests, by conservative counts, watched her walk the aisle. Ivanka and Jared Kushner were there, along with Eric and his wife Lara, Melania and Barron Donald Jr., and in a display of post-divorce cooperation that reportedly surprised people who remembered how bitter the original split had been, Marla Maples, who had helped plan the wedding alongside her ex-husband. The altar was arranged under an arch of blue, pink, and white flowers. Trump kissed his daughter on the cheek. By every external measure, it looked exactly like what a Trump family wedding was always going to look like, large, photographed, staged at Mar-a-Lago, with the family patriarch commanding the proceedings. But something quieter was happening underneath that surface, visible if you already knew what to look for. This was the first Trump family wedding in which the bride hadn't come out of the family's own core structure. Ivanka had married Jared Kushner, and she was the closest of the siblings to her father, the one who'd worked inside the business and would later work inside the White House. Eric married Lara Yunaska, who went on to become a Trump political operative in her own right. Donald Jr. had married Vanessa Hayden, and later began a relationship with Kimberly Guilfoyle. Every one of those marriages brought someone new into orbit around the Trump world, someone who was shaped by entering it. Tiffany's marriage worked in the opposite direction. She wasn't bringing Michael Boulos into the Trump organization. She was marrying out of it, into a separate, self-sufficient dynasty with its own global business footprint that had never needed the Trump name to matter. For the first time in her adult public life, Tiffany wasn't the one borrowing access. She was bringing something to the table the family could actually use. That shift became unmistakably visible in October 2024, when Donald Trump, speaking at a campaign event in Detroit, spotted Masad Boulos in the crowd, called attention to him from the stage, and described him as an exceptional guy doing important work for the campaign, adding, almost as an aside, that Tiffany happened to be pregnant. It was in effect the same man who 8 years earlier had qualified his pride in his own daughter, now publicly celebrating her father-in-law as a genuine political asset. The route from to a lesser extent to valuable ally ran directly through that marriage. There's a particular symmetry to how the engagement itself unfolded. Tiffany got engaged in the White House Rose Garden on January 19, 2021, the last full day of her father's first term, and she later described the setting as carrying more meaning to her than almost anything else about the moment. By that point, she had spent years attending state dinners, campaign events, convention speeches, and family holidays at Mar-a-Lago, doing everything the family generally seemed to expect of its members. And in the moment she chose to get engaged, she reached for the one setting that most concretely proved she belonged, the Rose Garden itself, and used it on the very last day it was hers to use. What came after that engagement was, with one notable exception, entirely her own. That exception was the announcement of her pregnancy. Tiffany hadn't yet said anything publicly when her father, at that same October 2024 Detroit event, mentioned it from the stage while praising Masad Boulos. The information was his to use, and the moment presented itself, so he used it. The child was hers. The announcement, as it happened, was his. Tiffany confirmed the pregnancy publicly on social media shortly afterward, and in May 2025, she and Michael welcomed their son, Alexander Trump Boulos. Her baby shower was hosted by Ivanka, who posted photos from the event. Tiffany, visibly pregnant, attended the January 20th, 2025 inauguration and was photographed with the extended family on the Capitol steps, the newest branch of the family tree, present but not yet born. She and Michael returned to Miami not long after. She has been notably absent from the machinery of her father's second term, much as she was absent from the transition team after his first. The Boulos family, by contrast, has real representation inside the administration. Masad now serves as senior advisor for Arab and Middle Eastern affairs, traveling to Riyadh, Doha, and Beirut, and meeting with foreign leaders as a functioning diplomatic actor in one of the world's more volatile regions, a role multiple accounts describe him performing effectively, bringing exactly the kind of personal, relationship-based credibility in Arab political circles that American administrations rarely have direct access to. Michael continues to work in the family business, moving between Miami, London, and Lagos as the Boulos operations require. Tiffany, meanwhile, is a mother in Miami with a law degree she hasn't yet formally put to use in practice, a husband with a demanding international schedule, a son born in 2025, and for what may be the first time, a life organized primarily around her own choices rather than around whatever the Trump family calendar happens to require. She posts occasionally on social media. She shows up for family events. She is present without being deployed, a distinction she has spent essentially her entire adult life trying to hold on to, one the marriage finally made structurally possible in a way nothing before it had. Marla Maples remains the single most constant presence in Tiffany's adult life. She was at the wedding and involved in planning it, and she posted a tribute to her daughter on Instagram the night before the ceremony, describing the years since first holding her as a baby and promising she would always be that same daughter to her, wedding day and beyond. Marla lives in New York now, not far from where Tiffany had lived before relocating to Miami, and the closeness between them has clearly been a chosen one. Marla stayed near her daughter through law school and the years that followed, sustaining what has consistently been the steadiest relationship of Tiffany's life. She chose not to remarry after her divorce from Trump, telling people she wanted to focus entirely on raising her daughter without the complications a new marriage might bring. She worked on acting projects, took on charity and television work, and raised Tiffany largely alone, while somehow maintaining enough of a working relationship with her ex-husband to jointly plan their daughter's wedding at his own private club decades later. That cooperation is worth pausing on because it wasn't obviously predictable. The divorce between Donald Trump and Marla Maples wasn't a clean or quiet one. The tabloid coverage of their split was extensive. The financial negotiations were reportedly contentious, and the years immediately following were not warm ones. That 23 years later, the two of them could collaborate on their daughter's wedding says something, though the public record can't fully settle what exactly it says, whether it reflects real personal growth on either side, Marla's particular capacity for grace, or simply the practical demands that come with raising a child inside a famous, endlessly documented family. What is clear is that Marla has been, across the whole of Tiffany's life, the parent who consistently showed up. When Tiffany talks about her childhood, she talks about it largely through her mother, not her father. That warmth is unmistakable in every account. The absence of an equivalent warmth on the paternal side is just as unmistakable, and nothing in the public record works very hard to hide it. At the wedding, her father walked her down the aisle at Mar-a-Lago in a tuxedo beside a daughter in crystal-covered Elie Saab, both of them looking forward toward the altar, the flowers, the guests, and Michael Boulos waiting at the far end. It's an image of a father delivering his daughter toward her future. It's also an image of a man who had been largely absent from the childhood that shaped the woman beside him, who had once qualified his pride in her on national television, who hadn't included her on his transition team, who would go on to announce her pregnancy before she'd announced it herself, finally present for precisely the occasion that required his presence and little more. He walked her down the aisle. He kissed her cheek. He handed her to Michael Boulos. A few days later, he held a press conference and announced he was running for president again. The marriage itself has stayed relatively private in the specific way that a life not organized around political campaigns tends to be. Tiffany and Michael appeared together at family occasions. She was visibly pregnant at the 2025 inauguration and photographed with the family on the Capitol steps. She hasn't taken on a formal role in either the administration or the broader political apparatus. She posts online with the frequency of someone who maintains a public presence without letting it become the organizing principle of her life. She has a child, a husband with a genuinely demanding international career, and a law degree that for now sits unused in any formal legal practice. What came after that engagement was, with one notable exception, entirely her own. That exception was the announcement of her pregnancy. Tiffany hadn't yet said anything publicly when her father, at that same October 2024 Detroit event, mentioned it from the stage while praising Masad Boulos. The information was his to use, and the moment presented itself, so he used it. The child was hers. The announcement, as it happened, was his. Tiffany confirmed the pregnancy publicly on social media shortly afterward, and in May 2025, she and Michael welcomed their son, Alexander Trump Boulos. Her baby shower was hosted by Ivanka, who posted photos from the event. Tiffany, visibly pregnant, attended the January 20th, 2025 inauguration and was photographed with the extended family on the Capitol steps, the newest branch of the family tree, present but not yet born. She and Michael returned to Miami not long after. She has been notably absent from the machinery of her father's second term, much as she was absent from the transition team after his first. The Boulos family, by contrast, has real representation inside the administration. Masad now serves as senior advisor for Arab and Middle Eastern affairs, traveling to Riyadh, Doha, and Beirut, and meeting with foreign leaders as a functioning diplomatic actor in one of the world's more volatile regions, a role multiple accounts describe him performing effectively, bringing exactly the kind of personal, relationship-based credibility in Arab political circles that American administrations rarely have direct access to. Michael continues to work in the family business, moving between Miami, London, and Lagos as the Boulos operations require. Tiffany, meanwhile, is a mother in Miami with a law degree she hasn't yet formally put to use in practice, a husband with a demanding international schedule, a son born in 2025, and for what may be the first time, a life organized primarily around her own choices rather than around whatever the Trump family calendar happens to require. She posts occasionally on social media. She shows up for family events. She is present without being deployed, a distinction she has spent essentially her entire adult life trying to hold on to, one the marriage finally made structurally possible in a way nothing before it had.